Welcome to Infinite Returns, Commercial Real Estate Investing. Brought to you by Infinity Commercial Capital. We help people find money. We are investors, lenders, and financing advisors. And this podcast is about real estate investing and helping you. Whether it's investing in residential rental properties or commercial properties, we talk about lending and all things real estate. From newbie to experienced, from funding to the strategy it takes to find success. Welcome your host, Karl Baker.
Well, welcome to our show, Infinite Returns, a show about commercial real estate investing. We talk about all things real estate investing. Thanks for joining us again today. I'm your host, Karl Baker, a real estate investor, a licensed CPA for over 30 years, and the CEO of Infinity Commercial Capital, our show's sponsor. At Infinity Commercial Capital, we help people find money. And we'll talk more about our services at the end of this program. Before we also get started, if you're watching by YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the show. And if you're listening on an audio podcast, follow the show and like the show so that you can hear previous and future content. We have lots of good things coming. So let's do that. Thank you very much again. Today, I'm joined by my friend, former colleague, and real estate realtor, Paul Doelling from St. Louis, Missouri. What I'm going to do is I'll tell you what I know about Paul, and then I'll let him introduce himself. Paul and I, 20 years ago, we both changed careers over the decades, and Paul and I worked together in a professional services firm about 20 years ago and became acquainted there, worked together with clients, and have just stayed in touch over the years. And there was a time when I lived in St. Louis, and so we got to know each other there. So Paul, welcome. Thanks. Welcome to the show.
No, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Great. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell the audience about yourself. I alluded to a few things, but tell the audience about yourself and have a couple other questions for you.
Sure. Well, started out my professional career in healthcare because I went back to school to get a master's in healthcare administration, and I was managing physician practices for hospitals that owned the practices. And I also did consulting, and that's where Karl and I met because I was as a consultant with his company. I should say the company that we both work for, as well as other companies. But primarily, on the financial side of physician practices, working for corporate entities that own physician practices. My goal was to improve the practice efficiencies, reduce expenses, make sure the practices are running properly and increase revenues. And so, there's also have to deal with legal and state issues, compliance and so forth. I did some real estate at the time. I was in several of the positions where I did have to analyze leases, renew leases and so forth, or create new leases. And just a few years ago, I entered into the real estate business about the same time as COVID. And, I've been working with commercial and residential clients ever since.
Awesome. Now, one of the things that your resume said, I didn't know this, but you referenced that you have education in classical guitar. Fascinating.
That's right. Well, when I first went to college, I was in high school, I was playing guitar, and I started studying classical guitar. And so I do have a degree in performance in classical guitar, which what I wanted to do is be a guitar performer on concert. And there are a lot of classical guitarists out there that do that. But, after a while, I thought, well, that's all I'm going to be doing. I feel like I could do more than just that. So, I kept up with the classical guitar for years, but, after having kids and, how that works, you don't have to say anymore, so you just get busy and I just lost track of it. That's all,
Yeah.
So, that's my.
Cool. Now, one of the things that we believe in in my personal household and my company is being involved in the community and giving back. So I just ask our guests, what's your favorite cause? Just talk about what your favorite cause is.
Well, in terms of giving back, I do it several different ways. One was getting involved with the International Institute here in St. Louis. It's a large organization. It's been around for a long time. And what they do is that they receive refugees, immigrants that have been vetted by the federal government and are placed here in St. Louis. And if you remember back when there was that war in Bosnia, we received a lot of Bosnian refugees. So the same thing goes now. We have a lot of Afghans from Afghanistan, Ukraine, and then Central and South America. So I help them try to find apartments and also volunteer in other ways to help them out, because it is a nonprofit organization, but they do get a lot of money from the federal government and donations. But primarily, I work with them to give them some of my expertise to find apartments, make sure that the apartments are, livable. And in addition, I do other things in the community. I'm also a volunteer at the Missouri Historical Society. And I'm on the board of the United Nations of St. Louis and on the board of Viva Brazil. So there's a lot of things I do outside of work, but it's good because of the fact that I like a varied, activities. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Cool. Well, excellent. Again, just want to continue highlighting the fact that it's important to be good citizens of our community. So I knew you were. Right. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about that. So let's talk about real estate. I know I brought you onto the show to talk about what's happening in St. Louis, but I'm also going to ask our listeners to understand in the context of this conversation what's happening in the Midwest, because real estate is certainly a locale-based industry. So what's happening in New York City is different than what's happening in LA, Chicago, St. Louis, and Jefferson City, Missouri. It's just all different. But there are some themes, and certainly if you listen to people talk in real estate, you'll know that there are blocks of the country. And so I wanted to have Paul talk to us, one, about his service and style and how he helps real estate investors, but also doing that in some context of Midwest real estate investing. So with that in mind, Paul, talk about how you are helping real estate investors. I'm sure you can even just put some context to it. I'm sure you're helping people buy their primary residences as well as real estate investors. Talk about your service and how you help people just broadly, and then we'll narrow down.
Well, as I mentioned, I work with clients with both residential and commercial properties. Commercial is when you get down to investors, it doesn't necessarily mean that all investors are in commercial business. Some of them are, some of them aren't. And the reason is because when you get into housing, commercial really starts with more than 6 or more units in a single building. So I do help with investors, and they're primarily from out of town. They want to invest in St. Louis because, number one, it's a lot cheaper to buy buildings here in St. Louis, the Midwest probably, than in Los Angeles or some other place like California or on the East Coast. So they come here and they look at houses that are either run down for some reason, they may be empty, or they may have tenants in place already, but they're not well maintained. So what they do is they look into the ones that are for sale, and they could be, let's say, the vacant ones could be like $50,000 or $60,000. The ones that have tenants, those are going to be a little bit more expensive. And what the purpose of the investor is basically to, one of two things: either buy and hold a property, and what they do is invest money and capital into that building, into that house to improve it, and then find somebody to rent it to. The other way is to buy and flip, fix and flip, like a lot of people have mentioned. That's where they buy the property, put a lot of money into it, but instead of keeping it and trying to lease it, then they just want to sell it. So the amount of money that they put into the house plus a purchase price should be relatively low in comparison to what the what the sales price is. So let's say somebody buys a place for 50 or 60,000, puts in another 50 or 60,000, maybe more in terms of renovations. So they're probably going to want to sell it for around 200,000 because they already put in 140, $150,000 into that building. So they want to make a profit. And the amount of the profit really depends on, number one, what they bought, how bad of shape it was in, and what kind of neighborhood it was in too. There are a lot of sub neighborhoods in St. Louis, primarily have it divided between the North St. Louis and South St. Louis. And the reason why I say that is because South St. Louis, that's where most of the population of the city really lives. And there are lots of...
That's where you live.
Yeah, I live in the county, but I used to live in the city. And there are a lot of 2 and 4 family flats. We call them flats because they have flat roofs. It's easier to say that. and so as a result, there's just a lot of them there. So in other words, buying and renovating and either fix and flip or buy and hold, you're going to get some money out of it. Now up in North St. Louis, there aren't that many houses, there aren't that many homes, and it was a lot of population migration was going on in the North St. Louis area over the last 50, 60, 70 years. And so there are a lot of houses that are either empty, vacant, or they may have some tenants, but they're not in very good shape. So, investors want to buy those properties, once again, renovate them and either, buy and hold, or else they're going to flip and sell it for a little bit higher price. The problem with that, though, is that if you're one of the first investors in a certain neighborhood, you're going to be surrounded by houses that are not in good shape. And so when you renovate them and try to sell them for a high price or higher price, then you're going to have some resistance with people who may want to buy them, but not necessarily for the amount that you want to receive, because they see other houses in the neighborhood not in very good shape. So there's a lot of variety, a lot of situations involved with investors and how I work with them, where they want to go in the city. And since they're from another state, I have to basically educate them in terms of how St. Louis is, the city is different between the South and North and the city, that is. And then also when you have the counties, it's a little bit different because those are newer buildings, but primarily looking at the location and how much the ARV is, which is after repair value. So I give them all that information. I also give them information about the rent. So if they wanted to buy a certain 4-family flat and the rent there is $500, then investigate what the market rate rent is, and it could be $750. Then they say, hey, that's a pretty good deal. I'll be able to charge more money. I'll be able to get more profit out of it. So there are a lot of variables involved with this, and sometimes the investors don't like any of the properties that are available at the time. So what I do, because they are out of town, is that if they if they contact me and they say, hey, I want to buy this property, then I tell them once again what St. Louis is like. If they want to pursue that, that's fine. Then I actually make an appointment to go and look at the property. I walk the whole thing because I want to make sure the floors are even. There's no sagging. There's no issues with the flooring. I look at everything. I'm not a contractor, but after going through this for so many years, you kind of know what's involved. Bathrooms that are not in good shape, or to renovate them, or one price kitchens. Those are the 2 biggest issues right there. And then I look at the basements, look at how old the furnace and water heaters are, look at the plumbing, also look at the electrical in case there's any issues, and then figure out if there's any water in the basement or mold in the basement too.
Cracks in the foundation, wiring issues with some of those houses.
Right. Yep. And then what I do is go back and report to the investor and say, hey, this is what I found. This may not be a good situation. I remember for one of my clients who's been with me for about a year now, we looked at this one property, and you went in the basement. It smelled so bad from mold that I had somebody come in, a mold remediation company, and he said it would cost like $25,000 to fix it. And he said, technically nobody should be living in this apartment building. So that was enough for my client to say, no, I don't want this place.
Right. Right. Wow. Well, so I was taking a few notes. You talked a lot there. You talked about a lot, is what I meant to say. A lot of good
Sure.
stuff there. So, would you say that, given your experience in looking in South St. Louis, North St. Louis, that it's generally a good place to invest? Is St. Louis a good place to invest? Is there, especially as you focused on the rehabbers, and I talk to a lot of rehabbers. Would you say that St. Louis has a lot of opportunity for investing in the area?
Yes, there is. There's definitely plenty of opportunity, or else investors wouldn't be coming here. They've been doing this for years, even before I got involved with real estate. And certain areas, like I mentioned before, they're just different. Now, I do know that I've been following the St. Louis City government in terms of their plans of revitalizing North St. Louis, and just met with somebody last week who's involved with that. I don't want to say organization, but basically a group of people who, want to do something about the North St. Louis City, because of the fact that, there is a lot of property there that could be better used. And instead of just depending upon investors one by one going in and renovating houses and so forth, it's going to take a long time to really build up the city the way it used to be. So I know that they have a plan to do more in the North St. Louis area than they do in the South City. So I'm encouraged to see that there's going to be more activity. The price of houses will be going up to what I would call more market rates. And I think that, when I see investors, like I represent somebody right now who's trying to sell their 4-family flat. It's in really good shape, but just where it's located, a lot of investors say no, because I'm not going to get my money out of it. But they don't realize that the city is going to be reinvesting a lot of money into those areas. So now might be a good time to get involved and buy those places and start doing something with them, because the value of those buildings is just going to go up, and you're going to see more equality between the North St. Louis and the South City areas.
Interesting. One of the things that we talk about, or others especially talk about, if you're listening to national news about real estate, is the concept of high demand, low inventory. There's just not enough housing. It sounds like a real estate investor that wants to be a rehabber in the Midwest. It sounds like that inventory issue, at least for rehab opportunity type homes, there's plenty there, and would have plenty of work.
Definitely. And you have to realize that there are certain areas of St. Louis City where companies have gone in and built, let's say 100 units, new buildings and so forth. So the vacancy rate, was pretty tight for a while. It's coming down now. But the thing is, though, is that with, buying more 2 and 4 family flats and even bigger buildings, then that's going to make up for the lack of housing. And I think that once again, when you start looking into the houses that have been selling, like, for example, there's one area near the Central West End, that we call it in St. Louis, where these houses are big mansions, and they all are dilapidated. People just left them, and they're vacant or whatever. And, when investors get done with renovating the house, we're talking about $350,000 to $400,000, and people are buying them. So, and that's pretty high for St. Louis City, $350,000 to $400,000. Maybe other parts of the country, it's nothing. But you could go out to the county and get those kind of houses, but you're not going to get what I call a 3-story, historical type house. Right,
with really interesting architecture.
Yes,
I know exactly what you're talking about, and the architecture is really unique and fantastic to look at. So I know there's an attraction there, and you're saying there's a market.
Yes.
So let me also ask. I know how Infinity Commercial Capital would look at those deals, but have you been with your investors? What have you been seeing in the financing space for some of your rehab clients? Are they getting access to capital? Are there hard money lenders, I assume? Are there banks? Are there banks doing are they supporting the rehab projects in St. Louis?
I don't see a lot of banks supporting that. But then again, there could be with other people. But usually it's hard money lenders, and you can get those throughout the country. And so that's where I find most of my investors. Also, the fact that once they buy a few properties, and then over time they sell them, then they can build up cash to be able to buy another one and so forth. It also depends on whether or not they are buying and holding and receiving the rent. And so there's a possibility of, the rent could be anywhere between, $900 and $1,500 a month. That would give them the cash also to be able to, buy another building without having to go through any kind of lenders. So it really depends on the investor, how much money they have to begin with, and whether or not they use hard money lenders. And I think that's where you usually get most of the financing is through the hard money lenders.
Yeah, that wasn't going to be a surprise. That's kind of what I expected you to say, but
right.
didn't really know if the market was different in St. Louis. That's my experience. So, that's pretty much what we do is private institutional fix and flip lending. Curious, for those that are doing the classic BRRRR method, buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat, for those that are holding those projects, again, just asking, are banks financing the permanent rental properties? Are they doing that? Or are most of your clients doing personal versus commercial lending? And for, let's just say, a single family or a 2-family flat or a 4-family flat, have they been getting the financing from the local banks, or how have they been doing that?
Well, they've been getting financing. I'm not sure if they're getting them from the local banks, because most of the time they have financing from other out of city or out of state sources, because they are from out of state. So as a result, they probably already have their contacts, and it's just a matter of just using those lenders over and over again. So I haven't seen anything that's directly coming from St. Louis banks. But like I said, there could be with other investors, but the ones that I'm working with, they usually don't.
Yeah. Okay. Well, just curious, and really, I'm just wanting to educate listeners on if you're doing this. One, we're talking about St. Louis, so you might want to call and inquire about opportunities in St. Louis, but also just broadly, the way rehab projects are done, by and large, is through private money lenders, whether they are just individual wealthy people off the street that are lending their own money, not necessarily trained as lenders, but they are, maybe they've got some experience with that, maybe not, or there are true professional hard money lenders, whether they are, small firms or large private institutional firms. Capital is out there typically for those kinds of projects, typically not at the banks in most parts of the country. But so that's really what I wanted to highlight. Let's see what else. I appreciate and you can see, listeners, how a realtor is going to help you. He's talked about analyzing the deal, giving some valuation information, given some information on scope of work, and that experience is helpful.
And cash flow too, because the fact that, everybody's looking for a cap rate of at least 8%. So, 8 to 10%. Sometimes I look at cap rates at 12% and just wonder, what is this all about? I really got to investigate this a little bit more. So if you're between 8 and 10%, that's kind of like the sweet spot. And that's what you want to look for. Investors want to get And so you really have to know your market in terms of rent. Expenses, are usually pretty low. It depends. Like in the city, the tax rates, are pretty low. It's not that significant. So it's primarily going to be your, management fee that's going to take most of your expenses, insurance, and just any other things like repairs and so forth. But once again, that's why you have to do really a lot of due diligence to look at the property and know exactly what you're buying and where, and then also getting the tenants, and that makes a big difference.
Yeah. So let's ask a final question here in that regard. We've talked a lot about rehab projects, and I find myself saying a lot of people get into real estate for purposes of passive returns, and it's just important to understand rehabbing is a business. It's not passive. It really takes a serious amount of expertise and skill set, and solid surrounding yourself with solid team members that can help you with your construction work, et cetera, because it's essentially contracting work. But outside of that, if a real estate investor wants to use that approach to build a portfolio, then it's important to understand the rental market. Talk briefly about what the rental market is like in the city of St. Louis. I'm assuming there's a high demand.
Yes. And, properties that have, I would say primarily they're going to be month-to-month tenants. And so the rates have been, basically steady. They probably, let's say 5 or 10 years ago, they start out at, let's say $500 for maybe a 600 or 700 square foot, apartment building. You may get into larger apartments. Like I have this one that's 1,100 square feet, almost 1,200 square feet per unit because it has 2 bedrooms. So you would expect more money, for the rent. And then you find owners that are, only charging maybe $800. Another thing that kind of identifies what the rent rates would be is the Section 8 housing dollars that's given to, people who are, in the poverty line. I guess that would be, people who are making less than $15,000 per person, and then obviously families and so forth. So they get Section 8 vouchers, and that money is paid directly to the landlord. And that's very secure financing for the investor, because if you do have a Section 8 tenant, then the money's always going to be coming in every month without any hiccups. So that's a real benefit for people. Now, I know some investors are like, I don't really trust Section 8 tenants. I said, well, they're going to be just like any other tenant. I mean, they're going to be good ones, and they're going to be bad ones. I've been in apartment buildings where you had both. So you can't just generalize and say that they're all going to be that way. And that's where your management company really comes into play. Make sure they're checking on the property on a regular basis and making sure that the rent is, coming through and so forth. Your management company will I'll tell you one thing, will either make or break you once you get a few properties under your belt. Because if they don't know how to manage the property and, check in on the tenants, and if it's non-Section 8, making sure the money comes in, then it's going to be more of a hassle for you than anything else. So that's another key item, is to have a really good management company. If they're not working for you, then, leave them and get somebody else. That's the best thing you can do, because I have a client who, had a management company that wasn't doing very well. He kept them on. And it's just like, why don't you just drop them and get somebody else? He finally did. And guess what? He's finally making money now. So it makes a big difference.
It can make a big difference. Right. Fascinating. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it also highlights the fact so many people talk about real estate as a way to build wealth and passively build wealth. But again, the reality is investing in real estate requires skill, requires professionalism, it requires hard work, and it's a business. It's a business.
Yes.
And it's just important to understand that. So it's great that we end on that comment. All right. So I'm going to now segue into what are some of the lessons that I learned. Some of you, or if you're watching this on video, you see that I might have been looking over to the side. I was taking a few notes, one to make sure I asked the questions that I wanted to ask, and from the comments that Paul was making, and then also some of the points. So I learned a lot about the city of St. Louis. A lot of people are coming in from out of town. It's reinforcing the concept that there is a strong market in the Midwest. I think rehabbers would have rehabbing investors have a fantastic opportunity in St. Louis. I'm certainly working as a lender with one of Paul's clients, and can see the opportunity to really revitalize some of the parts of the community. And, you're making money, but you're providing a service to the city. So I see that. I appreciated hearing Paul's feedback about his service and any realtor's service in terms of helping a investor vet a deal, whether it's evaluating the purchase price, the rehab needed, whether it's going to be worth it or not, what's the ARV, the future value, and the cash flows. So rely on your realtor for help in that regard. Any other lessons or final comments, Paul?
No, I think you summed it up. Like I said, and like I should say you said, is that it is a business. It is something where you can get passive income if you are successful at doing these things, doing the due diligence in terms of, which properties to buy and when you want to hold them, when you want to flip them or, hold them or whatever. Good management company. And, it just takes time. It takes a lot of, expertise. And the more that one, I saw this with one client, the more that he purchases and buys and then sells, the more education and experience and knowledge he has. And it really makes a big difference for the future, because then, we're on the same wavelength. It's like, hey, this is a buy and hold. This is what I want to do with it. Check it out, blah, blah, blah. And it goes a lot faster that way. And now that he has a good management company, he's, really reaping the benefits of the properties that he held. And so I think that there's a lot of possibility, but it's not a straight shot. There's a lot of bumps along the way, and it takes us, I would say, a special person to be able to do this and be successful too.
Fantastic point. You're right. I mean, it's complicated. It's not easy. It's not all glamour. There's really hard work involved. And that's important, but it is rewarding. It can, financially and, just, in the human experience in terms of, improving neighborhoods, et cetera. So it's a great way. Well, very good. Paul, contact information. If somebody wants to reach Paul, his phone number, and we'll put it in the notes and probably on the screen, 314-650-9575. He works for Platinum Realty, so I'll give you his website, and I'm reading here. It's www.pauldoelling, and DOELLING.UnitedPlatinumRealty.com. Again, we'll have that in the show notes. But you can also find Paul in LinkedIn. I know he's active in LinkedIn. He and I chat via LinkedIn a lot, so you can find him there as well. Anything else, Paul?
Not that I can think of. I think that's pretty much in a half an hour.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I appreciate it. It was a great conversation. I'm quite sure it will be helpful to people as they are wanting to learn more about real estate. Number one, Midwest. Number two, St. Louis. Number three, real estate investing in both rentals and rehab projects. So I think it's fantastic. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you.
So a quick word about thank you. Sorry about that. A quick word about our sponsor, Infinity Commercial Capital. I'm the firm founder of Infinity Commercial Capital. We help people find money very simply. We're lenders and financing advisors. We help people in financing the types of projects we talked about today, 1 to 4 units, also multifamily, 5+ units, other commercial properties. Our value proposition includes a few things. one, we represent the borrower. We are going to look at what your scenario is and find the right funding path for you. Number one. Number two, 30-year fixed rate commercial loans for permanent financing and bridge and other bridge loans, whether it's for rehab or straight bridge for residential and commercial properties. And then finally, simplified underwriting. We're asset-based lenders. So we are going to primarily look at the deal. We're not going to be looking at your tax return. We're not going to be asking you for your W-2s. We're not going to be looking at global debt to income ratios, et cetera. So those are some value propositions for the loan programs that we offer at Infinity Commercial Capital. Finally, you can find us at Infinity Com Capital, and that's in the show notes, infinitycomcapital.com. Email us at info@infinitycomcapital.com. Call us at 314-403-7745. And you can find us anywhere in social media. We're all over providing educational content about real estate. And thank you for reading that. As we wrap up again, follow the show, subscribe. If you have questions or comments, leave a comment in the audio platform or the video platform. If you want to be a guest on the show, don't hesitate to reach out and ask. We'd be happy to talk with you about that. We're always looking for guests. Look for more shows in the near future where we will be continuing to talk about the economy, real estate, and all things real estate. So thanks very much for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time.
Questions, comments, want to be a guest? You can reach Karl at kbaker@infinitycomcapital.com. You can find all episodes of Infinite Returns Commercial Real Estate Investing on all major podcast platforms and YouTube. Thank you for tuning in. And until next time, happy investing.